So today I'm going to be deviating a little bit from my usual classic literature type and delving into what I guess would be considered popular literature. It's a relatively old novel by the name of Silence of the Lambs. Now, this is a series that I happen to really love. I'm a huge fan of thrillers, and so initially I had seen the movies, and I've been making my way through the books. I've read Red Dragon, which is actually the first in the series, a little known, and this one, Silence of the Lambs, which is the most well-known of the series. In fact, few people know much of the series other than Silence of the Lambs and maybe Hannibal, which was the third in the series. There was also a prequel that was made after the fact called Hannibal Rising, but basically this was written by Thomas Harris, and he wrote Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, and Hannibal as a trilogy initially. And I believe Silence of the Lambs became really big. This book was considered to be a lot better than Red Dragon because it involved a lot more of the Hannibal Lecter character. Whereas in Red Dragon he was pretty minor. In Silence of the Lambs he played a pretty major role, and I believe Anthony Hopkins in the movie for Silence of the Lambs won an award for, it must have been Best Actor or Supporting Actor, I cannot remember which, but I know he won an award, and it was record-breaking because of the relatively small amount of time that he was actually in the movie. I think if you add it all up, he only had about 15 minutes of screen time. But because of the character he played and how well he played it and just how absolutely haunting it is, he became really famous for it, and it continues to be the role that he is most famous for. Hannibal Rising they did as a prequel, and it was written after the popularity of Silence of the Lambs, because by that point Hannibal Lecter had become such a huge character that the publishers told Thomas Harris, look, if you don't write an origin story for this guy, somebody else will. So they essentially pressured him into writing this origin story, which became Hannibal Rising, which also became a movie, which I believe has Gaspard Ulliel. For those who know French movies, he was in A Very Long Engagement, and he's been in a few other French movies, but yeah, he's a French actor, which I should have grabbed my other books so I could show you the covers of those, but anyway, today I'm mostly going to be focusing on this because it is the most popular, and I figured of all of the books, the chances are more of you guys have seen Silence of the Lambs than any of the other books or movies in the series, because this is the biggest. But yeah, the books are, I don't want to say they're too hugely different, but because of the nature of writing versus movie making, they are very different. They're quite a bit longer, there's a lot more detail involved, and a lot more of, I guess, behind-the-scenes type action. Due to the nature of movies, particularly thrillers, there's a lot of adrenaline involved, and you need to constantly be on the edge of your seat. Whereas that is less like that with books. They can show you a lot more of the behind the scenes, a lot more of the like administrative work behind the FBI, a lot more, they show you a lot more into the minds of the characters, I guess, which is what I really like about it. So I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts, and I'll sort of explain to you why I chose those two excerpts, because it was very hard for me to choose. And I'll try to explain this because I picked the excerpts from the middle of the book, because the thing is, the excerpts at the beginning aren't quite as interesting because not as much has happened yet, and while the excerpts at the end are far more interesting, people who haven't seen the movie would not always entirely understand. So if you haven't seen the movie or read the book and you don't want to be spoiled, I'd say stop watching now, go pick up the book, watch the movie, whatever. Do that. But if you have seen the movie, you should be able to understand this fine, but I'll try and explain it to the best of my ability for people who haven't. So basically, this is about an FBI agent in training, Clarice Starling, who is working under a man in the FBI known as Jack Crawford. And they are working to try and get some information out of Hannibal Lecter, because there is a serial killer on the loose named Buffalo Bill. Now, Buffalo Bill is known for taking bits of skin off of his victims, and they've been found scattered location-wise, so it's difficult to pinpoint him, and especially because he dumps the bodies in the rivers, so it's hard to tell, where the body has been dumped because it gets found further downstream. So, and while interviewing Hannibal Lecter, Clarice discovers that he knows a lot more about this case than he's letting on, so they're trying to get some information out of him. And to do that, what Clarice and Lecter start doing is, they call it quid pro quo, so one for one. Clarice gives him information about herself and her personal life, her background, whatever it is that he finds interesting, and he in turn gives her information about the case. And there's a lot of drama that goes on because one of the women who they believe has been kidnapped by this man, who has been kidnapped by Buffalo Bill, is the daughter of a senator. So there suddenly is a huge push from the political angle to get this girl back alive, because suddenly, it's the daughter of someone famous and not just some teenager in some backwater town who nobody really knew, which were, the previous victims were, nobody really cared about them, but now it's a senator's daughter. So, there's that. There is, I want to exemplify the, how Lecter's voice is very distinct and, I think, very poetic. So, for example, one line is, when Lecter's sort of trying to put the pressure on Clarice to give him more information about her, so that in turn he will reveal more. So he's trying to pressure her a little bit, and he's telling her, that the girl who's been captured is named Catherine. He's like, Catherine is never going to see the light of day again. He says, the sun's a mattress fire her God died in, Clarice. And it's just sort of this. See, they don't put that in the movie. They don't put those very poetic lines for him in the movie. He has some pretty poetic lines, which I can't think of many off the top of my head, but I think in the movie they sort of pushed aside some of his more poetic and artistic nature in favor of making him look more intimidating, which works for a thriller, but it doesn't entirely show that side of his personality that I happen to love. Anyway, and there's this, I think, beautifully written moment when Clarice is sort of in a hurry to get some information out of Lecter, and she's just finished telling this long story about her backstory, which relates to the title, The Silence of the Lambs. Telling this story about how she used to live on a farm and how she woke up and she heard the lambs screaming and they were about to be slaughtered, and so she tried to run away with one of them, and this huge story, and then she gets told that she needs to go, and she's trying to tell him, please, just give me Buffalo Bill's real name, just give me his name, because she knows that the name that he has given the authorities is incorrect. And they're sort of pulling her away because she has to catch a plane and get back home. So, let's see, he said, goodbye, Clarice. Will you let me know if ever the lambs stop screaming? Yes. Pembry was taking her arm. It was go or fight him. Yes, she said, I'll tell you. Do you promise? Yes. Then why not finish the arch? Take your case file with you, Clarice. I won't need it anymore. He held it at arm's length through the bars, his forefinger along the spine. She reached across the barrier and took it. For an instant, the tip of her forefinger touched Dr. Lecter's. The touch crackled in his eyes. Thank you, Clarice. Thank you, Dr. Lecter. And that is how he remained in Starling's mind, caught in the instant when he did not mock, standing in his white cell, arched like a dancer, his hands clasped in front of him, and his head slightly to the side. I thought that was a very, very beautifully written piece, and especially for those who have seen the movie, is a very distinct moment, because they always, in the past, have spoken through glass or wire or something separating them physically. The only way they were able to exchange objects is if one placed one down and then the other would pick it up. So here is the first moment where they actually touch. And I like that they did manage to emphasize that in the movie, although it's not exactly the same without that description. Another bit that I want to read out is one of the bits where they show Buffalo Bill's perspective, and that's another thing that I really like, is that in the movie they only show a couple of snippets, just sort of, they show you that, you know, they show you that Catherine has been captured, they show you her at the bottom of the well, the famous, you know, it puts lotion on its skin scene. They show you the also famous, infamous scene of him sort of dancing around naked in front of his mirror. The whole he wants to be a woman thing, you know. But the way that he's written in this book, his chapters are written as very distinctly different, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I really like it, so I'm going to read like a portion of the beginning of one of his chapters. But let's see. There we go. Room into room, James Gumm's basement rambles like the maze that thwarts us in dreams. When he was still shy, lives and lives ago, Mr. Gumm took his pleasure in the rooms most hidden, far from the stairs. There are rooms in the farthest corners, rooms from other lives that Gumm hasn't opened in years. Some of them are still occupied, so to speak, though the sounds from behind the doors peaked and trailed off to silence long ago. The levels of the floors vary from room to room by as much as a foot. There are thresholds to step over, lintels to duck. Loads are impossible to roll and difficult to drag. To march something ahead of you, it's stumbling and crying, begging, banging its dazed head, is difficult, dangerous even. As he grew in wisdom and in confidence, Mr. Gum no longer felt that he had to meet his needs in the hidden parts of the basement. He now uses a suite of the basement rooms around the stairs, large rooms with running water and electricity. The basement is in total darkness now. This is sort of a description of the area that he lives in, but even that description is written very, I guess, interestingly. I like the line that his basement rambles like the maze that thwarts us in dreams, where he talks about lives and lives ago. Because, I mean, this character is, and they don't really expand on it too much, but essentially this guy is essentially crazy. I mean, he's posed as this character who thinks he's a transvestite, and they go into that in more detail in the book as well, which is another thing that I like, that they explain that, I cannot remember whether, I believe it might have been some sort of abuse in his childhood or something like that, but it was something to do with the fact that he has always felt empty, and he's just incredibly angry at the world, and he's trying to fill this emptiness in any way that he can, where he's always felt different, and he can never quite explain that. So before he decided that he was a transvestite, he decided that he was gay. And again, Hannibal Lecter mentions that he says at one point, I don't think he was actually gay. I think he was just angry. And I know this that aspect of his story can be very controversial, especially because the LGBT community already gets a lot of hate. So I know a lot of, I've read articles that have said that they don't like the fact that he is portrayed as not actually a transvestite and not actually gay, because then people who are homophobic would take that as sort of, more of a reason to be homophobic. But I still think that it is interesting, especially because these characters are based off of real characters. Like, there wasn't one character, Buffalo Bill, who did all of these things. There were multiple serial killers who he was based off of. So, for example, Ed Gein was a serial killer who made clothing out of body parts. And I believe that when they show him abducting Catherine, his victim, he did it he had this van, and he had a cast on, so he pretended that he was trying to load up a van with this giant couch, and that he was having trouble because, his arm is broken. And so she's walking back to her car after getting groceries late at night, and she sees him struggling and offers to help. And so, he's actually a pretty strong guy, even though he doesn't look it in the movie, but, it's said he's pretty strong. So he takes advantage of that, throws her in the van, knocks her out, closes the van, and drives off. That is something that Ted Bundy did. And then the third thing is throwing them in the river. He would weigh them down, by tying like a rock or something to their ankle, and weigh them down and throw them in the river so that, one, evidence gets washed away, two, the body ends up extremely battered, and three, they can't tell when or where the person died, and because, they're not going to find it for days to weeks after the body's been dumped. So that is something that the Green River Killer did. And this is something that a lot of, I know TV shows do this, like Criminal Minds. A good friend of mine watches Criminal Minds, and she'll sometimes tell me about whatever serial killer is in the latest episode, and then I'll tell her, oh, that was based off of this guy, and this guy, and this guy. But that's what a lot of the most famous serial killers are like. They're based off of certain aspects of other serial killers. I know Hannibal Lecter is in many ways based off of Ted Bundy, because Ted Bundy was also known as this sort of sociopathic, extremely intelligent, like Ted Bundy had gotten his degree in psychology. So it feels like, in many ways, Hannibal Lecter was written as an exaggerated version of that. Rather than just someone with a degree in psychology, he was a psychiatrist. So I think it's interesting to, I know a fair deal about serial killers, so it's interesting to analyze fictional ones and just the way that sort of universe of mental health and criminology and psychiatry and how that's interpreted in media in relation to how it is in real life. So yeah, Silence of the Lambs, highly recommend it for those who are interested. For anyone who has watched the movie and really liked it, and particularly if you're more interested in criminology or psychology or the FBI, that sort of stuff, you'll really like it. If you really only liked the movie because you're into action-y, thriller-y stuff and you like the excitement of it, you will probably not like the book as much. But if you are interested in, psychiatry, psychology, criminology, stuff like that, totally up your alley, and I would highly recommend it. Like I said, I've read Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs. I have Hannibal, which is the third one, and then Hannibal Rising, which is the prequel, but I've only made it about partway through Hannibal. So I can't really say much for Hannibal or Hannibal Rising, book-wise. Both movies are amazing. Red Dragon, both book and movie, amazing. Just highly recommend the whole series, basically. So, yeah. I'm gonna wrap this up here, and I will see you guys next time.